Please, Mama, Emeka screamed, his voice breaking as he carried the lifeless body of his mother, Mama Emeka, in his arms. The blood from her head was staining his expensive shirt, but he didn't care. He had forgotten all about the high-end suits, the mansion, and the billionaire status that had once defined him. In that moment, the only thing that mattered was his mother who had given him everything. But it was too late. Mama Emeka was gone. Just moments ago, she had collapsed on the road after running out of the gate, her body crumpling like a fallen leaf as an oncoming vehicle hit her, before people could trace him. People gathered, shouting, pointing fingers at the vehicle that had hit her and left her to die. But no one could stop the horror that had already unfolded. Emeka stood there in shock, unable to speak. He had never imagined that his cruel treatment of his mother would end like this. The woman who had sacrificed everything for him, who had struggled to make sure he had a future, was now lying lifeless in his arms. And it was his doing. The memory of his last interaction with her replayed in his mind, over and over. He had walked towards her in the yard with a bottle of water in his hand. She had begged him for just a drop, her voice was weak from hunger and thirst. But instead of compassion, he had laughed, a heartless laugh that echoed through her soul. He had poured the water over her head, just like that. Her cry for help had echoed through the mansion, but he had ignored it. "What have I done?" Emeka whispered, his mind racing. "Why didn't I listen to her?" But it was too late for regrets. Mama Emeka was gone, and the curses she had laid upon him were already beginning to take their toll. Years before that tragic day, Mama Emeka was the pillar that held their world together. After Emeka's father had passed away, she became a widow and single mother, raising Emeka all alone. They were poor, but Mama Emeka was a strong woman. She didn't let their circumstances define her. She was determined to make sure her son had a future, and no sacrifice was too great. She sold firewood, grew crops, and worked tirelessly on the farm just to make sure that Emeka had food, clothing, and an education. Emeka, in his younger years, never truly understood the depths of his mother's sacrifices. She would often go without food to make sure he could attend school, and when he came home with good grades, she would smile, thinking it was all worth it. But deep down, she wished that one day, her son would realize how much she had given up for him. She had given up her dreams, her happiness, and her health to see him succeed. It was a few months before Emeka's final year at the university that everything took a turn. He had called his mother one afternoon, his voice strained with urgency. "Mama, I need money for my final year project. If I don't pay in the next 24 hours, I'll be expelled. Please, Mama, you have to help me." Emeka knew very well that his mother had nothing. But he was desperate, and he had learned to manipulate her for his own gain over the years. Every time he needed money, he would twist the truth, stretch the facts, and make her feel guilty. And every time, Mama Emeka would give in. She loved him too much to see him fail. "Emeka, I don't have the money right now, but I will find a way," Mama Emeka had replied. True to her word, she went to the farm early the next morning, determined to make enough money to send to him. She had gathered firewood, the same way she had done for years, even though her strength had begun to wane. This was her sacrifice. For Emeka, she would do anything. But she hadn't been careful that morning. While picking the firewood, she had bent down, not noticing the sharp wood beneath her, and went straight into her eyes. The pain was instant. She screamed, but no one was around to hear her. The pain from the sharp object piercing her eyes was unbearable. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she struggled to call for help. Hours passed, and the agony of being alone, unable to see, and unable to move, consumed her. When help finally arrived, it was too late. The damage was irreversible. Mama Emeka lost her sight that day, and her world, once full of light, became a shadow. By the time Emeka had graduated from the university, Mama Emeka had already lost her sight. But that didn't matter to Emeka. He had secured a job, started his own company, and climbed the ladder to success so quickly. He built a mansion in the city, flaunting his wealth and newfound status. He was a young billionaire, and Mama Emeka was nothing more than an afterthought. It wasn't long before Emeka's kinsmen began to call him, urging him to take his mother to live with him in the city. People in the village whispered about what a good son Emeka was for bringing his blind mother to live with him. But what they didn't know was that this was where the true cruelty began. Emeka had moved his mother into his mansion, but instead of treating her with love and respect, he ignored her. He fed her scraps and forced her to stay in the dark, isolated from the world for her not to embarrass him before his friends. He didn't care that she had given up everything for him. To him, she was just a burden. His business, his wealth, and his social status mattered more than his mother's well-being. And so, the once strong woman who had sacrificed her entire life to raise Emeka found herself living in neglect, in silence, and in pain. Her heart ached, not just from her blindness, but from the bitter realization that the son she had worked so hard to raise had become the very person she feared, selfish, arrogant, and ungrateful. But Mama Emeka would not let herself be forgotten. She would make her son realize the weight of his betrayal. As Emeka continued to rise in wealth and stature, Mama Emeka's bitterness grew. She would sit in the corner of the house, her heart heavy with regret. She had given everything, but in the end, it had led to nothing. Emeka had become someone she no longer recognized, someone who could not even spare a drop of water for her. The day she had been waiting for was fast approaching, the day when Emeka's arrogance would be his downfall. One afternoon, as Emeka was busy making business calls, he overheard the sound of Mama Emeka struggling to move across the mansion. Her feet shuffled along the floor, and then, a sharp clink echoed through the hallway. She was trying to get to the garden outside, to beg for alms, to survive. This was something Emeka had long stopped noticing, the fact that his mother was still trying to scrape by, even though he had more than enough to give her a life of comfort. Emeka paused, frustrated. He had no time for her nonsense. She should be grateful to live in his mansion, to have a roof over her head, food on the table, and his financial support. Yet, every day, he saw the same desperate need in her eyes. It was as if nothing was ever enough. "I've had enough of this," Emeka muttered to himself. He slammed the phone down and went to the window, looking out at the beautiful garden. There she was, Mama Emeka, standing on the porch, clutching her arms against her chest. The weather was hot, but her frail form shivered as she slowly reached the front gate, muttering something under her breath. She had gone outside again to beg. Emeka's blood boiled. He had given her everything, and this was how she repaid him? She had no gratitude, no respect for all he had done for her. In his mind, she was nothing more than a burden. But in reality, Emeka had been starving her mother and often take her breakfast towards evening despite her age. This made Mama Emeka to start begging to at least feed herself. But then, his thoughts took a darker turn. What if he could get rid of this nuisance once and for all? What if Mama Emeka's neediness could finally be silenced? The idea crept into his mind like a venomous snake. He was the one in charge now. He was the one who had made it. Why did she have to remind him of everything he had left behind? Later that day, as Emeka walked into the mansion's courtyard, he spotted his mother sitting by the gate, her head lowered in shame. She had begged enough, but today, she seemed defeated. Her body was trembling, her hands groping for the ground. A slow ache began to form in Emeka's chest, but he quickly suppressed it, turning his attention to the task at hand. Mama Emeka lifted her head slightly, sensing someone was near. She didn't need to see him to know who it was. She could feel the presence of her son, the one person she had given her life to. "Emeka," she called softly, her voice filled with quiet sorrow. "My son, please. I am hungry. Could you spare a little food? Just a bit." Her plea was meek, a simple request. But Emeka's heart hardened. He could feel anger rising up within him. How dare she ask him for food, when he had given her everything? He had given her a mansion, Yes, but she had no right to act as if she was still the beggar from their village. In his mind, she was beneath him now. He was a billionaire. She was just his blind, helpless mother. No, Mama, Emeka said coldly, walking past her. You've had enough. I've done enough for you. Emeka's words struck like a slap. Mama Emeka's face fell, the pain of rejection sinking deep into her bones. She knew this moment would come when she would finally be discarded like the old clothes no longer needed. But what hurt most was that it came from the one person she had given everything for. With trembling hands, Mama Emeka reached out to him, but Emeka didn't even glance back. Instead, he grabbed a bottle of water from the table beside him and walked away. He couldn't stand the sight of her anymore. Mama Emeka sat still, feeling the sting of his rejection deep in her heart. She could still smell the faint scent of his cologne lingering in the air, and for a moment, she thought she had misheard him. Could he really be this cruel? Could this be the same son who had once kissed her forehead and promised to make her proud? She could hardly hold back the tears, but she didn't cry. She couldn't afford to. As a woman who had lived through so much, tears were no longer her comfort. Instead, she closed her eyes, and for the first time, a bitter curse began to form on her lips. I regret the day I gave birth to you, Emeka, Mama Emeka whispered, her voice was loud with pain. I regret every sacrifice I made for you. You will lose everything you've built. You will be humbled in ways you cannot imagine. The day will come when you will remember me, and it will be too late. Her words echoed in the stillness of the courtyard, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. Emeka hissed and ignored his mother's curses. He was too caught up in his own world, his own empire, and his own desires to bother himself with the words of a frustrated old woman. Yet, something about that day didn't sit right with him. A cold shiver ran down his mind when he recalled his mother's words, but he quickly dismissed it. His mother was blind, after all. What could she really do? Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the house grew. Emeka kept himself busy, but there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when he would glance over at Mama, sitting in the same corner of the mansion, waiting for a scrap of his attention. Her eyes, though sightless, seemed to follow him everywhere. And still, Emeka ignored her. It was only when he returned home late one night, after another successful business meeting, that the consequences of his actions began to unfold. As he entered the mansion, he was greeted by the silence that had become the soundtrack of his life. There were no cheerful greetings, no sounds of his mother humming in the kitchen. Only the heavy silence that filled the air, suffocating him. That night, Emeka went to bed early, too exhausted from his day's work to notice the strange feeling that lingered. He had just begun to drift into sleep when a sudden crash shattered the silence. A loud, sharp sound followed by a scream. Emeka bolted upright in bed, his heart pounding, and began to panic. What was that? He rushed to the door, his mind spinning with fear. Could it be a break-in? But as he made his way down the hall, he stopped in his tracks. The scream had come from outside. Mama Emeka. Without thinking, Emeka ran towards the gate. But the sight that greeted him was something he wasn't prepared for. His mother was on the ground, in a pool of blood. Mama, he cried out, rushing to her side. He carried his mother, blood staining his clothes as she clutched his chest. Mama, please, wake up, I will okay amends, please don't die. But it was too late. Mama was dead. Mama Emeka was buried amidst tears. Those that knew what happened blamed Emeka for treating his mother, who described her life to make him succeed so badly. The morning after Mama Emeka's burial, Emeka was still reeling from the events that had unfolded the previous days. His mind raced with confusion, guilt, and fear. He had spent hours thinking on the way forward after Mama's demise, his mind replaying the previous day's events. The scream. The blood. The way his mother had looked at him, her eyes filled with pain and disbelief. He couldn't shake the image from his mind. But as the hours stretched on, He couldn't help but feel that he was now facing something much worse than a broken relationship with his late mother. The weight of her curse hung heavy on his shoulders, and he had no idea how to escape it. Emeka sat in his sleek black SUV, staring blankly at the road ahead. He had just left the police station where the officers said they could not trace the driver that hit his mother. The injuries were severe, and she couldn't hold, and the old woman who was starved died at the spot. There was no doubt that she had suffered, and deep inside, Emeka knew that he was responsible for it. As he sped down the highway, the weight of the previous events began to suffocate him. He couldn't stop thinking about the curse his mother had placed upon him. Her words had been sharp, cutting through his conscience like a knife. You will lose everything you've built. You will be humbled in ways you cannot imagine. The more he thought about it, the more it began to feel real. Something about her curse, her anger, seemed to hold a power that he couldn't explain. Stop it, Emeka muttered to himself, shaking his head. This is ridiculous. It's just a coincidence. My mother's just upset. She doesn't have that kind of power over me. But despite his words, a deep sense of fear began to settle in his chest. He glanced at the rearview mirror, and for a split second, he thought he saw something, a fleeting shadow, something moving behind him. His heart skipped a beat, but when he looked again, it was gone. Emeka's hands tightened around the steering wheel. He was being irrational. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. 2 days later, the first sign of the curse began to manifest. Emeka was in his office, finalizing the paperwork for a major business deal that would expand his company's reach even further. His phone buzzed on the desk, an incoming call from one of his business partners. He picked it up, trying to maintain his composure. Emeka, are you okay? The voice on the other end asked, a hint of concern in his tone. Emeka frowned. Of course, I'm fine. Why wouldn't I be? There was a pause before the voice spoke again, this time sounding more hesitant. Well, I don't want to alarm you, but your company's accounts have been frozen. Emeka's blood ran cold. What do you mean, frozen? That's impossible. But it wasn't impossible. It was happening right before his eyes. He quickly hung up the phone, his heart pounding. His mind raced as he opened his laptop and began frantically searching for answers. His bank accounts, his company's funds, everything had been locked. No transactions could be made. His employees couldn't get paid. His investments were stuck. The panic set in. Why would this happen? Emeka muttered under his breath. There has to be some mistake. He made several calls to the bank, but each time, he was met with dead ends. The bank claimed that they had received an order from the government to freeze his accounts due to a fraud investigation. An investigation he had never heard of. It was absurd. Emeka's mind began to race. This couldn't be happening. How could his company, his empire, be crumbling so quickly? He had worked so hard to get to where he was. But the more he thought about it, the more the words of his mother echoed in his mind, you will lose everything you've built. The following day, things went from bad to worse. Emeka woke up to the sound of his phone buzzing incessantly. He groggily reached for it, his heart sinking when he saw the news notifications that filled the screen. Emeka's company under investigation for alleged financial fraud. The news spread like wildfire, and before Emeka knew it, he was being hounded by reporters and journalists asking for comments. The allegations were unsubstantiated, but the damage had already been done. His reputation was in tatters. Not again, Emeka groaned, running his hands through his hair. I don't even know what they're talking about. But it didn't matter. His company was in turmoil. Investors were pulling out, his clients were canceling contracts, and his employees were beginning to leave. He tried to hold everything together, but the pressure was overwhelming. As he walked through the hallways of his mansion that evening, the once grand and luxurious home now felt like a prison. He had everything a man could ever want: wealth, power, success, but it all seemed meaningless now. He could hear his mother's voice in his head, her curse repeating itself over and over. You will lose everything. As Emeka sat in his lavish living room, staring at the empty space before him, he couldn't help but feel like he was sinking into a pit of despair. It was as if the world he had built was crumbling right before his eyes, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But this was just the beginning. The next day, Emeka received another blow. A call came in from his estate manager. His 2 properties in the city, the ones he had worked so hard to build, had gone up in flames. There's a fire, sir. Both properties are completely destroyed, the manager shouted in panic. We've called the fire department, but it's too late. Emeka's breath hitched. No. Not this. His eyes darted around his office as he tried to process what was happening. It was too much. Everything he had worked for, the mansion, the company, the properties, was slipping away, piece by piece. His world was burning down, and there was no way to stop it. He rushed to the site of the fire, hoping to salvage anything, but when he arrived, all he could do was watch as the last of his 2 houses burned to the ground. The black smoke filled the sky, the crackling of the flames mixing with the sound of his heart shattering. That night, Emeka found himself at a crossroads. His company was gone. His properties were gone. His reputation was ruined. He had lost everything he had worked for, everything he had thought would last forever. With no other options left, Emeka did the one thing he never thought he would do. He left the city and returned to the village, to the place he had once vowed to escape from forever. But even here, in the quiet of the village, Emeka couldn't escape his past. Everywhere he went, people whispered behind his back. His kinsmen had long suspected that something was wrong with his success, but now, they knew the truth. They knew what had happened. The curse was real. Emeka sought help from local native doctors, hoping for a way to reverse the curse, to regain everything he had lost. But each one told him the same thing. You must apologize to your mother, they said, their voices full of pity. Only then will your troubles end. But how could he? Mema Emeka was dead, gone beyond reach and buried. As Emeka knelt in the village shrine, his face streaked with tears, he finally realized the truth. The curse was not just a warning. It was the consequence of his own arrogance, of the way he had treated the woman who had given him everything. But no amount of apologies would ever bring her back. The village felt different now. What was once familiar and comforting now seemed distant and foreign to Emeka. The paths he had walked as a young boy, the same paths that once symbolized a future of limitless possibilities, now seemed like endless stretches of regret and sorrow. Every step he took in the village was heavy with the weight of his own failure. His once proud, towering mansion in the city was gone. His thriving company gone. His reputation shattered. And despite all of it, there was one thing he couldn't escape: the curse. His mother's words were a constant, suffocating presence in his mind, following him wherever he went. You will lose everything. It had come to pass. But there was still a glimmer of hope, also Emeka thought. The native doctors had told him there was one way to reverse his fate: he had to beg for forgiveness from the spirit of his mother. Only then, they said, would he be allowed to rebuild his life. Desperation drove Emeka to seek out the most revered spiritual healer in the village. Old Mama Ngozi, known for her deep connection with the spiritual realm, was said to have the power to communicate with the dead. If anyone could help him, it was her. The sun had set by the time Emeka reached Mama Ngozi's hut. The air was thick with the scent of incense and burning herbs, the kind of smell that could either calm the soul or stir the deepest of fears. Emeka stood at the threshold, his hands trembling. He had no choice but to face the truth: his life was in ruins, and the only hope he had left was in the hands of this mysterious woman. Come in, Emeka, came Mama Ngozi's voice, a rasping whisper that seemed to come from every corner of the room at once. I've been expecting you. Emeka stepped inside, and the dim light of the hut cast long shadows on the walls. Mama Ngozi sat cross-legged on the floor, her eyes closed as though she were in deep meditation. Her wrinkled hands were resting on her knees, and the air around her seemed charged with an eerie stillness. "Sit," she commanded softly, her voice echoing in the silent room. Emeka obeyed, sitting across from her, his heart racing. He had heard many rumors about Mama Ngozi. Some said she had the power to summon spirits from the dead, others said she could curse people with a single word. But Emeka didn't care about the rumors. He just wanted his life back. "Why have you come to me?" Mama Ngozi asked, her voice as quiet as the night. Emeka swallowed hard, trying to find the words. I've lost everything," he began, his voice breaking slightly. "My business, my wealth, my reputation, all of it is gone. And I know it's because of my mother's curse. I need your help, Mama Ngozi. I need to find a way to make things right. Please, tell me what I must do." Mama Ngozi opened her eyes slowly, peering at him through the flickering candlelight. Her gaze was piercing, as though she could see through the very fabric of his soul. "Do you know what your mother's curse really means?" she asked, her tone sharp and inquisitive. Emeka hesitated. "It means I will lose everything I've built. It means I will be humbled. But I don't understand. Why me? Why did she curse me?" Mama Ngozi sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries of wisdom. "Your mother's curse is not just about what you've lost. It's about what you took for granted. Your arrogance, your pride, your belief that you could escape your past. Your mother gave everything for you, Emeka. She sacrificed herself to raise you, and you repaid her with cruelty. Her curse is not meant to destroy you, it is meant to make you understand. To make you see what you've done to her." Emeka's heart sank. He had always known, deep down, that he had taken his mother for granted. But hearing it out loud, from someone who knew so much, was like a slap to his face. He had never understood the depth of her sacrifices. He had never understood what it had cost her to raise him. "You must face your mother's spirit," Mama Ngozi continued. "You must go to the place where her soul lingers, the place where she fell, the place where she cursed you. Only then will you find peace." Emeka's eyes widened. "You mean I must go to the farm? To the spot where she was hurt and lost her sights because of me?" Mama Ngozi nodded. "Yes. But be warned, Emeka. The journey will not be easy. The spirit of your mother is angry, and she will not forgive you easily. You must prove that you are truly remorseful. Only then will her curse be lifted." Emeka stood up, his body shaking. The thought of going back to the place where his mother had suffered so much was unbearable. But if there was any chance of breaking the curse and reclaiming his life, he had no choice. He turned towards the door, but before leaving, he looked back at Mama Ngozi. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Mama Ngozi didn't respond. She simply closed her eyes and returned to her meditation, as though she had already seen the outcome of his journey. The next morning, Emeka found himself on the familiar road leading to the farm, his heart heavy with dread. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a pale glow over the land. Everything seemed unchanged, yet, for Emeka, nothing would ever be the same again. This was the place where everything had started, the place where his mother had been so brutally struck by fate. It felt like a place of both beginnings and endings. As he approached the spot where Mama Emeka had fallen and lost her sights, the memories flooded back. He could see her there in his mind's eye, bent over, picking firewood, unaware of the sharp piece of wood that would change her life forever. The agony she must have felt. The helplessness. The isolation. Emeka knelt down, his knees pressing into the earth that had once been so familiar, and he began to pray. His hands shook as he offered up his plea for forgiveness. "Mama, I'm sorry. I am so sorry. I never understood what you went through. I was selfish. I took you for granted. Please, forgive me." For a long moment, there was silence. Emeka could feel the weight of the air around him, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. He waited, hoping for some sign, something to tell him that his plea had been heard. Then, Just as he was about to give up, the wind shifted. A chill ran down his spine. He turned around quickly, but no one was there. The land was still. But something had changed. Emeka's heart raced. He felt it, something was different. A voice, soft, distant, whispered through the air. Emeka! His heart stopped. The voice was unmistakable. It was Mama Emeka. But there was no time to react. The earth trembled beneath him, the wind picked up, and a voice filled with fury echoed through the trees. You have taken everything from me. Now, you will pay. He dropped to his knees, his heart pounding, his palms pressed against the cold earth. He felt a deep, gnawing emptiness in his chest, the very same emptiness that had driven him to disregard his mother's love and sacrifices. He realized, in that moment, just how much he had taken for granted, how far he had let his arrogance lead him down a path of destruction. Mama, please. I beg you, Emeka whispered, his voice shaking with the realization of what was happening. I am sorry. I never meant for this to happen. I never understood. I was blind, but now I see. Please, forgive me. But the air grew colder, and the wind howled even louder, as though the earth itself was rejecting his plea. You were blind, the voice of Mama Emeka responded, her words dripping with sorrow and pain. But now you see, Emeka. And it is too late. Emeka closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. He had never begged for forgiveness with such raw sincerity before. He had never understood the depth of his mother's love and sacrifice until it was too late. But now, as he knelt on the very ground where she had fallen and lost her sights because of him, he could feel the power of her words, her curse, coursing through him. The earth beneath him began to quake, and the sound of breaking wood echoed through the air. It was as if the land itself was mourning, crying for what had been lost. I know I have wronged you, Mama, Emeka cried out, his voice desperate. Please, I can't bear it anymore. I never understood, but I do now. I am sorry. I am so sorry. Please, come back. Please, forgive me. Let me make it right. For a moment, everything went silent. The wind died down, and the trembling earth ceased. It felt as though time had stopped. Emeka held his breath, unsure whether the silence was a sign of hope or the final seal on his fate. Then, slowly, the voice of Mama Emeka returned, quieter now, but no less powerful. Emeka, she said, her voice full of sorrow, yet tinged with something else, something like acceptance. Your journey is not over. The price you must pay cannot be undone, but your heart has changed. You see now, and that is all I ever wanted. Emeka's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? What price? What must I do? There is no easy path to redemption, Mama Emeka's voice whispered. You must live with the consequences of your actions. Your wealth, your power, it has all slipped through your fingers because you did not earn it. You took it from me. Now, you must rebuild. You must find true humility, true purpose. Only then will you find peace. Emeka's body shook as the weight of her words settled over him. He had thought that his life, his success, was something he could control. But he had been wrong. True success, true happiness, came not from wealth, but from something much deeper, something he had long neglected: love, humility, and gratitude. Emeka opened his eyes, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel his mother's spirit, her presence, still lingering in the air, like a soft, comforting embrace. He returned home, hoping for a fresh start to rebuild his life again. For the first time since the curse had been cast, Emeka felt a sense of calm, something he hadn't felt in years. But the calm didn't last long. In the distance, Emeka could hear the sound of approaching footsteps. He turned around quickly, his heart leaping into his throat. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and imposing. It was a man he had not seen in years, a man who had been part of his past before his life spiraled out of control. It was one of Emeka's former business partners, a man who had once helped him build his empire. But there was something different about him now. His expression was grim, his eyes filled with suspicion. "Emeka," the man said, his voice low and steady. "You've been summoned. The authorities are looking for you. There are questions about your involvement in the financial fraud. The investigation, it's not over. And now, with your assets frozen, you're being targeted." Emeka's heart sank. He had tried to ignore the mounting pressure, the feeling that he was being hunted, but now it was all coming to a head. His past had caught up with him, and there was no escaping it. No matter how much he had changed, the consequences of his actions still lingered. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this from you," the man continued. "You're running out of time, Emeka. They'll come for you. They already know everything." Emeka's stomach twisted. This was the last thing he needed. He had been through so much already, and now, just when he thought he was finding redemption, his past was threatening to pull him under once again. "I know," Emeka whispered, his voice heavy with resignation. "I know." The next few days were a blur of police visits, meetings with lawyers, and frantic attempts to salvage what little remained of Emeka's life. His mansion, once the symbol of his wealth and success, was sold off. His company, now embroiled in a corruption scandal, was dismantled. The luxurious cars, the designer clothes, the expensive watches, everything was stripped away. But in the midst of it all, something inside Emeka began to change. He could feel the weight of his mother's curse lifting, but it wasn't because of the things he had lost. It was because he had begun to truly understand what mattered. He had learned, perhaps too late, that love, humility, and sacrifice were the foundations of a meaningful life, not wealth, power, or status. Emeka didn't have much left, but for the first time, he didn't mind. He didn't need the mansion, the money, or the company. What he needed was to make amends. What he needed was to find peace within himself. He returned to the village, his heart heavy but determined. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, and that the scars of his past would never fully fade. But he was no longer the man he once was. He had learned, in the most painful way, the true cost of his own arrogance to a woman who sacrificed to make him succeed. If you like this story, comment, like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories. I will like to read your view about this story.